All right, today we are going to talk about where life comes from. So, if you want, I'll go back here. This would be a good heading. Where does life come from? It's not as deep as it sounds, but we're going to kind of talk about a little bit of history of biology and then kind of get to the present. So, where does life come from would be an excellent heading. I would like you to write this down. About 400 years ago in the 1600s, there was this thing called spontaneous generation. The definition for that, living things can come from non-living things. Living things can come from non-living things. Now today, we know that that's obviously not true. Okay, we know that, that never works. I can't have my chair give birth to a rabbit. Okay, that sounds silly. But there were some situations back in the day where they thought it was possible. One of the ones was if I have a pile of grain, a pile of corn, I'm sitting in my barn, what do you think that attracts? Mice, yeah. Well, what they thought is if you had corn, that mice would just kind of poof, come from corn. But that's not the case. What it did is it attracted them. The mice were some other place and they migrated there. So another example is if I have some rotten food, let's say an old hamburger from last night, and I'll leave it on the counter of my kitchen and I'll leave it there several days. Okay, there's eventually going to be flies there. Okay, and the reason for that, or maggots and things like that. And the thing is, flies will lay their eggs on that food, and when they hatch into the little larvae, the maggots, they're going to just be able to eat. So it's not that the old hamburger gave birth to it, but it attracted it. But people back then thought that that was actually happening, spontaneous generation. Just poof, there's a living thing. All right, use some examples. They use chicken broth as an example here. In the mid-1800s, this dude named Louis Pasteur, he was one of the dudes that came up with this term called biogenesis. What I'd like you to write down is biogenesis and the first bullet. So you're going to say biogenesis and say living things only come from other living things. Living things only come from other living things. That's called biogenesis. And basically what happened, I don't know if you've ever heard of Louis Pasteur, okay, if you've heard of a thing called pasteurization. Your milk, you buy milk and I think eggs and I think like orange juice is pasteurized in the store or before it goes to the store. And what that does is, he came up with that. If you heat up milk to a high temperature for a short period of time, it'll kill most of the bacteria in it. And so it'll stay good longer, so it won't go rotten as fast. They do that with eggs and some other things. So pasteurization. Well, basically what he did, is he took, to prove this, everyone was like, hey, this spontaneous generation is happening. And what he did was he took 2 containers and he put some rotten chicken broth in each of them. And then he set them outside in the sun. One of them he put a cover on, a cloth covering, and the other he did not. And after a while he checked them and he found out that the one that was uncovered had maggots and flies all over it. The one that had the cloth covering had no maggots and flies. So basically that proved that those were coming from outside places, that they weren't giving birth to the animals. So that kind of proved the whole biogenesis thing. So he gets some credit for that. And today we just accept that. Some other things, basically Earth is just really, really old, about 4 billion years old. And living things came after that. I'm not too concerned about any of that. So That's a short one.